Collective Insights is a voyage through topics and technologies revolutionizing human well-being. Groundbreaking approaches for a better world and a better life await you. Welcome to Collective Insights. Collective Insights and the work we do at Neurohacker Collective is made possible from the support of our community and the sales of our product, Qualia. Qualia is a comprehensive mental enhancement supplement designed to improve focus, mood, and flow state. Learn more about Qualia at neurohacker.com and use coupon code CollectiveInsights for $20 off your first order.
Welcome to Collective Insights. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Sandison, and I'm joined today by Mark Squibb, the owner and CEO, founder and CEO of LiveO2. So I'm really excited to welcome Mr. Squibb today, Mark, because I found out about LiveO2 through two people. One was a colleague of mine who was using the LiveO2 system, and she bought it for her clinic, and she was using it at home and never took it to the clinic because she was getting such great results athletically. She had really improved performance. And then another patient of mine also found the LiveO2 system and got incredible results within about a month. Huge changes in cognitive function and chronic fatigue in all kinds of areas of his life, improved sleep that we weren't even expecting. And so when this started happening to a couple of people around me, it was around December of 2017. By January, I had decided it would be negligent to not start incorporating LiveO2 into my own practice at North County Natural Medicine. So I reached out to Mark and wanted to learn a little bit more about what the hell was going on. Why were all these people getting so much better doing something that I had never heard about? You know, I went through medical school. I'd been around the block a couple times in medicine. And here was this device that was so profoundly helpful. How did I get more people on it? So thank you, Mark, for joining us to help break it down, both more for me. We've had the good fortune of spending quite a bit of time on the phone so that you could educate me. And every single time we get together, I learn a ton. So thank you for being here today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So can you tell me a little bit about how you got into the space of this adaptive contrast oxygen therapy?
Well, the story goes back about, a decade. I'd been, some people in my family got sick, and then one of my kids had a neurological injury. And I had been looking at oxygen, for personal use because I was getting old faster than I wanted to. And I started studying Manfred von Ardenne. And when I got into it, I was like, wow, there's really, it's a wonderful technology, but it wasn't quite mature enough.
I missed that. You started studying what?
Oxygen, but I started studying mostly cell energetics. My background is as a electrical engineer, so I always think sort of, I'll call it primitive in terms of power generation, plumbing, things like that are more logistical in character, thinking about our cells as energetic devices. So if there's some problem why a cell can't make energy or heal, then you want to go back and look at fixing what that is. And that's when I happened on the work of a really wonderfully brilliant German scientist named Manfred von Ardenne.
Thank you. I think that's the word you said, so I didn't get that. Manfred van Ardenne?
Yeah.
Got it.
And he had spent, many years building out and, articulating how oxygen actually worked. And there were some very interesting things that he had discovered, including how stress events or how oxygen actually reverse the effects of stress. So when we started looking at, various kinds of injuries, like it happened, like as I was getting older, unwillingly, like, okay, how can I protect myself from the stuff that's going on, and how can I protect my family? And as I got into trying to understand that, it's like, this is a plumbing problem. And what he had discovered is that if you install enough oxygen into the water part of the blood, then it works like a vascular decongestant. And that recently I learned about an experiment in I believe it was the Army, where they took a pig and they drained out all its blood and they filled it with saline. And then they put it in an oxygen-rich environment to the point where the oxygen pressure was 4 times normal.
Poor pig.
The pig was fine.
Really? Is that right? With no red blood cells?
with no red blood cells, that when you got enough oxygen into the body water, then the body didn't actually need red blood cells, and that number was about 4 times normal. So anyway, they did the experiment with the pig. When they were done, they put the blood back in, and the pig was fine.
Interesting. Wow, that's fascinating. So this was a military experiment?
Yeah, I don't know how top secret it was, but I heard about it. But, the interesting point there is that, when we look at the role of oxygen in the body, but what kind of struck me about this experiment is exactly what Manfred von Arden documented in his book, which is if you can get the dissolved oxygen in the water, in the lungs, or in the body, the plasma, up to about 4 times normal, then you see stuff heal, even in congested areas. So like when we get into thinking about the brain and what happens to us as we get older, there's a phenomenon I call ischemic dormancy, which is a big word. Basically, it means that something's happened that interfered with the blood supply to, a tissue. It can be anywhere. And rather than dying, that tissue will just go dormant, on to life. And what we started to see is that, if you have a stress event or something like that, tissues will stay offline or stay dormant for a decade.
Right, okay.
Or a long time. And when you turn the oxygen back on, they just come back to life, or they start working again.
One of the things that I love so much about your system and using it in my practice is that when I break down medicine, there's not that many things that cause disease, right? It's either toxicity, nutrients, structure, so either molecular structure at a DNA level, like a genetic issue, or maybe like a chiropractor's level where your spine is out of alignment, you're not getting good blood flow, so circulation. And then stress is the other big one. Infections is another piece. So really there's 5 primary drivers of disease in my mind. And the LiveO2 system, by increasing circulation and oxygenation, basically hits on all of them, right? So you can reduce toxicity and you can get the reduction. So you can reduce toxicity, you can increase blood flow so that you can increase nutrient delivery, including oxygen. So not just limited to oxygen, but my understanding, having worked with you for a little while, is that you're getting your vitamin C and your magnesium and all of your nutrients are going to get there better because you're increasing the integrity of the plumbing. Like you're using that analogy, and I like that. It's simple to think of it as like piping. And then in addition, the structural component, because we're getting so much better blood flow, if your neck is a little bit out of alignment, we're still at least getting better blood flow to that area, even considering any structural integrity problems. And then with stress, you just mentioned it, right? If there's an injury, then we're helping to heal that injury a little quicker. And I would imagine, we think about stress as injuries and physical, but then also even at our mental emotional level. Do you have any thoughts about how this might be influencing the adrenals, or how it might be influencing, well, you're getting some exercise, so that's helpful, moving meditation, but how it might help the sympathetic balance?
Well, let me stay with the plumbing for a couple of minutes. Okay, so when you go back to plumbing, I mean, people will say, oh, there's 20,000 miles of tubing in the blood vascular system, or 40,000. The bottom line is there's a lot. And when you get down to the very end, the capillaries are so small that the red blood cells have to bend to go through there. And I ran into some interesting research last week where they were, looking at basically tissue that had fibromyalgia. And they were saying, the tissue that has fibromyalgia looks exactly like tissue where you put a tourniquet on for 9 minutes.
Oh, wow. So reduce blood flow, certainly.
Well, not only does it reduce blood flow, but it actually creates a literal injury in the vascular system. So what happens, and this is back to Manfred von Arden, what he documented is that if you create a stress event, and which is any event that reduces oxygen for long enough, I mean, it can be a bruise, it can be a concussion, it can be a toxic trauma, it can be a loss of zeta potential. And if that injury or if that event simulates application of a tourniquet for 90 minutes, then the inside lining of the endothelium bloats. It's an injury to the endothelium, but it causes a kind of inflammation that basically shrinks the capillaries. And once you end up with that style of injury, red blood cells can't go through that capillary anymore, create what I call a brownout. And so as we go through life, whether it's toxins or anything like that, we end up with an increasing percentage of our body shut down. And it's so like when you take a look at LiveO2 and some of the really curious effects, the tissue that gets caught behind or suffocated by these, I'll call it these stress events that injure the vascular system, basically stay alive for, from the nearest I can tell, 15 years. Okay, but as we go through life and as we have these stress events, more and more of our vascular system or our bodies get shut down. So if you look at these mystery charts that say, oh, you lose 1% of your lung capacity a year, oh, you lose this amount of ability to produce energy, what I've come to believe is that this loss of physiological capacity, loss of mental capacity, is at least partly, if not mostly, indicating how much stress has blocked blood flow to these tissues. And so when you started to mention, the really good results with your patients, what I think is happening is we're basically opening that tissue back up and restoring, vitality and function to tissues that were dormant, so they come immediately back to life.
Yeah, we're really taking off that whatever is standing in the way of optimal performance, optimal function. So whether there's a pathology present, a diagnoses, maybe I'd love to hear what some of the common things are that you guys see. But certainly in my office, it's the chronic fatigue, and maybe if it's injury even after like a long-term chronic disease, things like Lyme or mold toxicity, where people have really reduced function for a long time, and we've gotten rid of whatever the infectious burden is, or we've gotten rid of the toxic burden, but they still don't feel like they used to. And this LiveO2 has seemed to make that big difference, where it actually repairs some of the damage that was done. So getting rid of that thing that's standing in the way of a human and their ultimate potential is what we're all about. And I think that LiveO2 does a really good job kind of across the board in helping to do that.
Well, and that's to go back to the plumbing problem. So whenever you have a stress event like Lyme attack or something like that, one of the byproducts of that is this vascular injury that I was mentioning. Okay, so what makes LiveO2 and why you see such a fast response is we're basically penetrating that tissue and healing that vascular injury in real time.
That's amazing.
So, like one of the, there are a couple of interesting points, and this goes back to Manfred von Arden, when we started to work with brain, and why I think that, the relationship between LiveO2 and Qualia and these products is so important, is that Arden had published a study with some older people, 70 years old, and he documented a 5 to 15% improvement in fluid intelligence. These were older people. We've come along and we've done the same thing with about everyone. So like if we do before or after neurological panels, and that's one of the things that we'll probably have up and running by the time the podcast goes out, is you can go on our website and buy a neurological panel, take it, use our product, and measure the shift in IQ, because it's such a common restoration. So like, when we do things or have, I'll call it anything that interferes with blood flow to the brain, the ability to like tune up before you start your day is important. So there's the increase in neurological and mental performance that comes with oxygenating brain. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to believe that an oxygenated brain is going to work better than one that's not well oxygenated.
And what you're telling me is that if I use your device, I'm going to be smarter today.
By the time your foot hits the floor.
That's amazing.
And we've measured it many, many times, and it's like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, why isn't everyone using this?
Well, because they don't know.
They don't know yet. All right. So we're here to tell them. So, Mark, we've talked a lot about kind of the nuts and bolts of how it works, or of how it might be beneficial. But how does it work? What are we doing here? We haven't even told everyone. What does LiveO2 do? Okay.
Well, it's surprisingly simple. Okay. And let me give you a couple of examples. The fastest and best way to deliver oxygen any place in your body is to use your heart and lungs, because the whole process is already set up. It keeps us alive. So LiveO2 is a turbocharger for your exercise. Okay, so it's a piece of exercise equipment. and a system that controls what you breathe when you work out. So you wear a mask. I should have one at my desk, but I don't. But basically, you put a mask on, and then you've got a switch that enables you to control what you breathe as either air on a simulated mountaintop, like 12 to 14,000 feet, which really causes your vascular system to activate, and then a switch that allows you to, in a moment, have a next breath of 85% oxygen. And the ability to activate, get blood flow, lets you basically activate blood flow circuits within the body. And then once you get the circuit active, you throw the switch and then you blast that organ with a lot of oxygen. So when we're talking about what we call brain O2, which is activate the circuit between the heart and the brain, short form is you exercise under a low oxygen environment until your body says, wow, I need to send as much oxygen or blood as possible to the brain to keep it oxygenated. So we activate that circuit. And then once that circuit is active, we throw the switch, next breath. And what that does, it'll send at least 4 times more oxygenated blood with 6 times more oxygen to the brain to create a potential brain oxygenation event of potentially 24 times normal.
Wow, 24 times normal. Okay, so when I first heard about this, I was equating it to, I think it was the 68 Olympics, right? They all went up to Tahoe to train, and then the Olympics were happening, I think, in Central or South America at sea level. So everybody up there who was training at elevation, which is part of what this is simulating, was going to have more hemoglobin, basically, in their body. It was going to be this EPO, the erythropoietin, was the mechanism, but they had to be up there for months training, and that was going to give them an edge at sea level. What we're talking about here is on a little bit different time frame, but a similar mechanism. We're basically taking the body's feedback loops and encouraging the body to deliver more blood and oxygen through a system of vasodilation, right? Is that what I understand? So CO2, I think you explained to me at one point, it's CO2 is one of the best vasodilators. And what we're doing on, I'll call it negative oxygen. That's when you're at elevation, basically. So there's less oxygen than is in the normal air. When there's negative oxygen, you're going to produce more CO2. And that CO2 is going to send a signal to open up the plumbing, to make those pipes bigger, basically. And then when you flip the switch to positive oxygen, which is that 85% or above normal oxygen concentration, then the plumbing is going to get a rush of this high quality or high oxygenated blood everywhere that it hasn't been going, into these brownout areas. Is that correct? Am I saying that right?
Right. It's a very standard fire hose metaphor. So you got a pump truck, which is your heart and your lungs. You got a long fire hose and a tiny constriction on the end. So what we're doing is we're basically telling the body to slam the blood as hard as possible through the fire hose so that it will squirt through the clogged little area at the end. When we do that, all right, if we can get enough, I'll call it oxygen dissolved in the water, it will squirt through the little hole, and the little hole will open up. Once that little hole opens up, any of the brownouts that were not served oxygen before will just go back to normal operations.
And how many treatments does it take for that to happen? So how many times do you need to live? One time?
Yeah, so we will see most people start to open up within the first 2 minutes. Yeah, so, but then the other part is we all have stress events, and once you get used to feeling good and, being tuned up, it's like, wow, I like feeling good. And literally every system in the body, whether it's the immune system or the digestive system or the liver, any part of your body that's not working as well as it should because it's not getting enough oxygen will go back to a more normal oxygenation. Just another thing that we've been trying to understand this for a while, but within a month, most of our users will see, I'll call it their list of health challenges, go back about 15 years.
And that is consistent with what I've seen at my office. So I'd love to kind of get your feedback about this. But what I typically tell patients is come into my office, try it out. The best results you'll get after doing it for about 5 or 6 days a week for 4 days a week, or excuse me, for 4 weeks. So for a month at 5 to 6 days a week. And then you'll see a shift in your baseline is how I typically describe it. And what we've seen, people get better sleep, higher quality energy, fewer aches and pains, just across the board, everything gets better. And I think it's because of what you're describing now in terms of the plumbing, but we've also talked about mitochondrial mediated benefits. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I'll go back to plumbing. So mitochondria is a power plant in a cell. Okay, cells have two different ways of producing energy, through aerobic pathways where they've got oxygen to work with, and then anaerobic pathways where they only have sugar. So a cell with oxygen and sugar has roughly 19 times more energy available to it than a cell running on just sugar. Okay, so the bottom line is the mitochondria, if they run on oxygen and glucose. If they don't have oxygen, then they can't produce energy for the cell. So it's really the same equation. It's not the cell that produces the energy, it's the mitochondria within the cell, but the mitochondria can't get oxygen if the cell can't get oxygen. So it is the same equation.
Got it. And so by doing this over the course of about a month, you get an increase in mitochondrial function or actual numbers of mitochondria. Do you have any sense of what exactly is happening there?
Well, there are a couple of different. The short answer is I'm not quite sure, but I will refer to some of the breathing techniques like, with the Iceman, Wim Hof, and so forth, where, challenging the cells at a low level basically will thin out the weak mitochondria so that the strong ones reproduce. I think there's some of that going on, but in our model, we're, like with the hypoxia, I think when you challenge yourself in a low oxygen environment, you're effectively exercising the mitochondria and you create stress. And I think over time, that, I'll call it elevated level of challenge, stimulates us just like to produce stronger mitochondria, kind of like little, barbells. The harder you make them work, the stronger ones survive, and then when the stronger ones start to reproduce, you end up with that better ability to make energy.
Okay, so that sounds like another mechanism. And I don't know if you're just seeing that in mitochondria, if you're seeing that in neurons or heart cells or any muscle cell, but this ability to go through apoptosis. So sometimes there are cells that are just kind of hanging around, not doing a great job, but there hasn't been the cell signaling to go ahead and recycle them or get rid of them. And that's one of the things I understand that happens with LiveO2 is that when you get in this kind of stressed environment, this hypoxic environment, it goes ahead and gets that signaling going so that you can get rid of the cells that are just kind of not fully pulling their weight.
Well, one of the metaphors I like to use is, when you take a young person, all right, and you have them run, or they run a complete all-out sprint. Once you get, number one, the act of that sprint is maximum exertion. But when you get to the backside of that sprint, what position are you in?
Exhausted.
No, you're bent over with your head between your legs, with your heart going boom, 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 breathing as hard as you can. Mm-hmm. Okay, that natural exertion recovery process is a natural cycle. What I believe happens in that is that stress of exertion, like you're escaping from the bear or the lion, and then you escape, and then the body goes through a natural recovery cycle where all it's really doing is spending all of its energy breathing. Mm. Okay, so escape, recover, that moving the body through that natural cycle of challenge, recovery, it activates all the mitochondria, it activates everything, and anything that's quote unquote, that happens to be not survive that experience goes through apoptosis, gets cleaned up. But the other side is the body is spending all its energy breathing at the backside. What I've come to believe is if we talk about the concept of over the hill, when we stop doing that as a life pattern is the very moment that these stress events or these little brownouts start to pile up. And it takes 15 to 20 years for enough of those to pile up that we start to see a decline in health. So what I think the correlation is why do we see a 15-year rollback in terms of, all health issues when you start using LiveO2, is we're reactivating that set of that physiology that we activate when we do that sprint, and we're bringing things online. They're back alive. So there's that restoration of vitality. And so I think that's the model. The detail about what happens in the mitochondria, I really don't know, but it's like when you were younger.
Fair enough. So, how did you come up with this idea? Where did all of this come from?
Well, the first thing I had, which is really kind of strange, is when I was younger, I used to get up every morning pretty much and glue the cracks on my feet back together. I wrote an article on our website called The Super Glue Junkie. And I never could figure out why it was that my feet would always crack. And it had been going on since I was 18 years old. So one time after I did this, I noticed that the next morning my feet were fine. And I've never had a foot crack in the past decade. The model was like, wow, that's really interesting. I wonder what's happening. And then I had another instance where my son was injured with I'll call it toxic injury. And, he started having seizures. And I wondered if what we were really looking at was oxygenation in the brain. And this is, I don't know, about 2010, something like that. And I was like, wow. And so he used the system. And all of a sudden, within an hour, his seizures resolved. And I had two different test cases. I had one where my feet had healed and his brain had healed. And I also noticed that, my mental coherence was so much better. Shortly thereafter, we live up in the Rocky Mountains, and we're up at 10,000 feet skiing, and I was skiing up a hill. And I noticed all I could hear was my heart beating in my head. And when I thought about it, that was the tympanic membrane. And I was like, wow, I wonder if I could make that happen and blast my brain with oxygen. What would happen? The result was it felt really good. And so I came back and I modified, the air system. We were calling it LiveO2 standard at the time. And I modified it to be able to include the switch to go from hypoxic to hyperoxic so I could simulate that environment.
I got it. So for a while you were using just the positive oxygen, so just concentrated oxygen, using that while exercising still?
Correct.
I see. And so you were just kind of toying with this at home, like in your basement or in your garage, and playing with it, seeing what the effects were for you. And then you got this idea, okay, if we use this contrast approach, then maybe we can get an even more benefit.
Right. So, with the straight oxygen, what happened was that I never could get my heart rate up to, much over 150, so I couldn't activate my vascular system. And I certainly couldn't get activated enough that I could activate that circuit of blood flow through the brain. And then what happened was I had the issue with my son, and we did this other technique, and literally in a day, most of his apparent dysfunction in his neurological panels resolved or started to resolve.
That's incredible.
And then I had some other friends that were, had multiple concussions and were disabled. And, literally within a day, we measured restoration of brain function. And this is in roughly 2013. I'm watching this happen. I'm like, there's something really profound going on here. I mean, before that, it was a personal curiosity because I like to be coherent when I'm working and, interacting with people. But when we started to see things that were, people that were disabled report that, oh, wow, I'm pretty much recovered in a day, I was like, there's something else going on. And that's when we really began to study the phenomenon in earnest. And that's when we started to see the real power of the adaptive concept, which is, oxygen is great. Exercise with oxygen is even better. But if you can really activate the internal systems. And then the other part was that getting that heart rate high and, just charging the systems started to really have an effect on literally everything, immunity, etc. So doing the adaptive process was creating, 2 or 3 times the level of result, and in minutes.
That's great. Yeah, so one of the patients that's been coming to my office, she's in a wheelchair and she hasn't walked in 6 or 8 years, and she can't feel her lower extremities, or she couldn't. And she's on week 3 or 4 of using the adaptive contrast system, the LiveO2 system. And we have a bike that we typically would put people on, and they'd wear the mask and do the adaptive contrast back and forth. Our protocol takes about 15 to 20 minutes. And so this patient, she has to stay in her wheelchair because she can't ride a bike. So she has an exercise that she does that can get her heart rate up. And it's been incredible. In the past few weeks, she's started to feel the bottom of her feet and the back of her legs.
Wow.
Yeah, so she's not walking yet, but all of us are very, very hopeful and excited about the potential here. So we'll keep you posted.
Well, I have cases like that too. One is a neighbor, and another was a lady that came over last weekend, and she was, I don't know what was wrong, but she was just to the point where she could barely drive or walk her. So what we did was we put her in a sauna, and I had a breathing resistance device. I usually have it on my desk, but the only voluntary muscles that she could control were her breathing muscles. So we were able to use breathing resistance with the adaptive contrast, and that created enough airflow and enough exertion that she could get her heart rate up, and she was actually feeling better by the next day.
Wow. Yeah, there's so much potential in this. So will you talk a little bit about that? Who are the range of people? You've talked about an epileptic, your family and friends and neighbors, it sounds like, are really benefiting from this. But you've talked about somebody with epilepsy. You had a skin issue. I've had patients with chronic fatigue, frequent urination, poor sleep. The colleague of mine who found your system, she's an athlete, and we go rock climbing together. She does great when she does her best climbs or after she's been on the bike for 20 minutes before she goes. So certainly athletic performance has come up. What are other things where you're seeing benefit? Who else could potentially benefit from using the LiveO2 regularly? Well,
one of the audiences that I like to reach out to is, people that work too hard. As we get into our career, 25, 30, you're starting to, you really need to work. And we get into this pattern where we go to work, we sit at a desk for 8 to 10 hours, 12 hours, sometimes 14. We may get a 15-minute workout, but then as our careers take off, we're so busy that it's like, well, can I afford to work out? And the answer is usually no. And, where I was at, and somebody told me the line is like, in Silicon Valley, you've got the Ferrari with a handicap sticker. And, the people in our culture that are working so hard and pushing them so hard and putting themselves under such stress, if they realize that they could maybe work a little less, use 15 minutes to do one of these protocols and tune up their brain, well, they could not only tune up their brain and be more effective, but they could preserve their health.
And this is really efficient. You're saying 15 minutes a day. Is that typically what you recommend?
Well, it's kind of a minimum. 15 to 30 minutes, but it's a super high efficiency workout. And another area that we're really targeting is in the military. And because we did some work with, the Air Force recently, and, the main problems they have are chronic pain, but they've got massive, and I won't cite the numbers because they're scary, issues with brain injury. We did some tests, and we were able to basically help literally everyone feel better and restore function within a couple of days. And so when we look at our culture and we look at everything, basically the stress is a common denominator in all of our lives. And it's hard to meet someone who says, oh, stress doesn't bother me. As a matter of fact, I don't think I've ever met anybody like that. And the thing that LiveO2 does is it gives you the internal process that helps you not succumb to stress. And if you have succumbed, it'll roll you back some. But it's really it's a powerful, fast, efficient tool to protect yourself and to preserve and defend your quality of life. So I'm really long on, hey man, let's don't get sick in the first place. Mm-hmm. Hey man, let's keep our brains working. Let's keep our bodies working so that, we don't fall apart. But then you get to the other side, it's like, well, some people don't realize that they need to take care of themselves until it is too late, in which case it's really a good rehabilitation tool. But the principle is ridiculously simple. If your body's well oxygenated, everything is going to work better.
Right.
If it's suffocating, it won't. And so when you think about almost any health issue, that's just like running up to seeing somebody laying on the floor. First question you have to ask, is it breathing? And you think about your body. Is it breathing? If it's not breathing, that's the first thing to take care of. Because anything that you do after that, or nothing you do besides that, can work if the cell is suffocating.
Right. Everything's going to work better if there's respiration, if there's that exchange of oxygen and nutrients at the capillary level.
Right.
So then tell me about potential risks. Is there anybody who shouldn't be doing this?
Well, and that's one of the interesting points. And I've only seen one situation where there was a problem, but the contraindication was more for exercise. So, like, for example, there are certain people that shouldn't exercise in certain ways. And since exercise is sort of the activating process, get your heart rate up, you shouldn't do any exercise with LiveO2 that is otherwise not recommended.
Okay. Yeah. And you've even been describing this as a stressor, right? So this is probably a good stressor, right? There's good and bad. But that stress recovery cycle, if you can't tolerate that stress, then probably staying away from this would be a good idea. So certain cardiac pathologies, cardiac diagnoses, if either a general care provider or a cardiologist has recommended that somebody not exercise, they should probably not stay off of this. And exercise is so essential to getting this to work well. Is there anybody who would benefit from maybe not exercising but using the mask and doing the adaptive contrast?
Well, we always recommend that somebody do something. Now, like when Manfred von Arden did his protocol, I mean, I'm sort of a type A personality, and more is better. But what he discovered is that if you can get your pulse up only 10%, then it starts to work. So it's not a question of should you exercise, it's a question of how much. So, like, for example, if you can, just go in a sauna and elevate the pulse a little bit and increase that, the oxygenation. But if you think about the vascular system, there's some pretty good data that says vascular, I'm losing my words here, arteriosclerosis starts when the endothelium, which is the inner skin of the vascular system, loses health. But it's usually hypoxia to the endothelium that starts the cascade of blockage, etc. So even oxygenating the vascular system itself is one of the most important organ systems to oxygenate.
Okay, so let me make sure I'm with you. You're talking about the blood vessels that deliver blood to the larger blood vessels?
Right. Well, there's that. Okay, but if we go back to where we first started, I said the injury to the vascular system that happens when you put on a tourniquet for 90 minutes is actually what makes that a problem is the fact that injures the vascular system itself. Mm-hmm. And the injury to the vascular system is caused by the absence of oxygen. So if you take the entire gamut of vascular problems, the reason the vascular system goes downhill so fast in the first place is because of not enough oxygen. So anyway, what I'm saying is there's kind of a paradox, which is if your vascular system is in such bad shape that you can't exercise, you got a real problem. So the trick there is, if somebody's got a vascular system issue, get them to start easy. And then as they get stronger, ramp it up, because absence of oxygen to the vascular system itself causes the injury. So it's almost a catch-22.
Got it. And then what about with lung pathology, something like COPD, or if somebody was having trouble with perfusion of oxygen or CO2, either getting it in or getting it out in the lungs, would that be something that we would want to watch out for and maybe not use the adaptive contrast?
Actually, I'm going to go the exact opposite. When somebody has a lung pathology, the main thing you want to do is get the lungs to open up. And so when you talk to somebody that has COPD or exercise-induced asthma, and you ask them how they felt the last time they went to the mountains, you know what they say? They say, wow, I felt really good. I don't know why, specifically with asthma. So what we kind of discovered is that, this inflammation we're talking about actually happens in the lungs. Okay, if it's in the capillaries in the lungs, then restoring the oxygen actually will open the capillaries in the lungs and help people with COPD have a durable improvement in respiratory function. But what's fascinating is it's actually the hypoxia, the reduced oxygen supply, that stimulates the lungs to open up, which is exactly the opposite of what you'd think.
Interesting. So that's why they feel better at elevation when they're in a relatively hypoxic environment.
Well, and that especially with the asthmatics. So an asthmatic will go to the mountains and say, wow, I'm climbing up the hill. I can't believe I did that. But what they don't realize is that the reduced oxygen concentration, tells the lungs to open up the bronchi, which is actually the opposite of asthma, because asthma closes it down. So as they get up and they start to open up, so when we train somebody with like an asthma, what'll happen is they'll be like, oh, I'm having a hard time breathing. So you take them to a hypoxic or low oxygen environment, they'll look like, oh, are you trying to kill me?
That's what I'm thinking.
Then all of a sudden their lungs will open up and they're like, oh, I can take a breath.
Interesting. And then you can probably switch to positive oxygen and they get a whole lot more oxygenation. My understanding of some of these COPDs, though, is that it's not as much oxygen coming in, but it's actually CO2 coming out, that you can't always get all of the waste out. So do you see any improvements in that?
Well, back into the COPD. So I did a publication this spring about flu, and the model there is that, anything that interferes with gas transfer in the lungs. Okay, so like in a COPD situation, if the blood doesn't flow through the lungs, then it can't release the CO2. Okay, so, and that actually drifts into a concept called asphyxiation, which is, the blood goes to the lungs, it circumvents, and it makes another trip around the body with a CO2 load. But if you ask the question, why is it the blood can't go through the lungs, it's usually because these same stress chokes exist in the venous side, or the inside the lungs. So the trick there is if you can get it ramped up enough so that you can actually get the oxygen to hit the chokes in the lungs and they'll open up, then the blood will start flowing through the lungs so it can drop the CO2.
Interesting.
And so if you take a look at most hospitals, the largest untreated loss center in a hospital is COPD. People go in because there's no effective treatment. They'll give them oxygen, but that really doesn't help because it doesn't help to restore the blood flow through the lungs. But in order to restore the blood flow through the lungs, you got to hit the backside when the blood's coming into the lungs with oxygenated enough blood to cause it to open up, which is really back to the stress cycle. You got to put them on, you got to let them work out, let them open up, and do as much as they can. And if you can just go 1% improvement, then things will start to open. And so, literally what we've seen with people that use LiveO2 that have COPD, our basic recipe, get on, work out, challenge yourself, they'll naturally activate that.
Great. So then what about people who have, like, we have a bike at the office, and I talked about our patient who's in a wheelchair, and we've found some alternative ways for her to work out. But I think one thing to make really clear is that you can't take this for a walk on the beach. You can't take this for a run. It is something that has to be fixed and in place. So you want to have some sort of exercise equipment where you can have this mask on, right, for it all, and stay close to the device. What are your favorite exercise equipments to pair with the LiveO2?
My favorite is a Kaiser bike. Because it's a premium piece of equipment. But the most important thing about that that bike or, any piece of equipment is the ability to do a sprint. And then because you've got, a connection, it's nice to have, like a recumbent or, anything that lets you move. But the second thing, I'm sorry for looping here, the ability to do a sprint.
Okay.
And the ability to engage as much muscle as possible.
Awesome. So like if you have the option between a treadmill and then a bike, like we have the Schwinn Airdyne, so you're using your arms at the same time as you're using your legs, you'd want to go in the direction of something where you're using more muscle groups, both arms and legs, upper and lower extremities. Correct. Got it. So for somebody who doesn't want to be on a bike, what's your next best option?
Well, a treadmill is good.
Treadmill, okay. That'll work.
I mean,
Nordic track.
A Nordic
track is great. Do they still exist?
Oh, yeah, they've got them all over the place. The short form is anything that's physiologically appropriate for the user. Okay. I mean, that it's about anything that'll get your heart rate up. It's about anything that you can challenge yourself with. I love saunas. My workout is usually, a good sprint on the bike and then, a nice hyperthermia inside the sauna, because the combination of the bike and the sweat, if I do that, I'm usually in a weight loss pattern within 3 days.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So that was another question of mine. We combine this with the sauna at my office. We also combine it with the Juve light. We also have been playing, especially this week, I had a patient where we were doing IVs before, so nutrient IVs before going on the bike. And then he was noticing that he would get quite fatigued. So then we switched it and we had him do the bike before the nutrient IV. We're just playing with it right now, trying to figure out what the best way to combine these protocols is. Do you have any thoughts about great devices that go with this, great therapies that go with this, and how to order them?
You kind of have to go by feel.
Okay, that's what we're up to.
Well, the piece there is like people ask me, is like, what's the perfect protocol? And then the answer is the perfect protocol is what the person's instinct tells them to do. So, like we all like to be, precise. But the most precise, accurate measurement of what somebody's going through and what they need is what they feel on the inside. Because
you make a great point, because I've done this, of course. I get on the bike and I use the mask. And there are moments where I feel a little anxious, especially on the negative oxygen. So in that hypoxic part of the protocol, I start to feel a little panicky, like I'm not getting enough air, right? And that's feedback. Your body's giving you that feedback that, yeah, you're not going to get enough air. You're not getting enough air right now, and you will die if you don't eventually get more air, especially if you're working. So listening to that is probably very helpful, and then adapting whatever the protocol is that we start with to that person's needs and that person's internal feedback. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes. And then there's also doing exactly the opposite of what your body tells you.
To push it a little harder?
To push it a little harder. So, and that's the difference between somebody who's in a recovery pattern that says, okay, I'm fragile, and then somebody who's in a training pattern that says, I want to go, I want to be stronger. And so there's this, divergence. And so what we see a lot with LiveO2 users is that they'll start out with a health recovery agenda, and they'll kind of take it easy on themselves. And then when you drift over, it's like, well, I'm getting stronger. And, maybe the next time I feel that anxiety, instead of like backing off and recovering, I'm going to charge. I wonder what will happen. But, giving people the choice and the freedom to kind of explore their own physiology by pushing a little bit. Like, so what happens, I do my workout and, I go pretty hard. The model there is I'll go like, okay, well, I'm feeling dizzy. But then I realize that with one flip of the switch, I'm back in oxygen, and 3 breaths I can recover. But creating a space and a process where people can be comfortable, doing those experiments for themselves and in control of their own experience.
Yeah, so have you ever had anybody be on the bike really pushing themselves and have them pass out?
No.
Never once?
Because, no. We all have the instinct of when it gets weird, we slow down. And that's the beauty of the exercise, because, when you're producing energy, you can always relax. And when you relax, you stop the rate at which you're consuming resources and your body recovers. So, like with LiveO2, and that's one of the weird things is like, we've been doing it for many, many years. And, we've, knock on wood, never seen somebody, go beyond that point where they had a problem, because the natural reflex is when you're doing too much is just to drop down and do less, or to rest. But that exercise or that budget of energy that you are putting out is quote unquote excess. So you can always drop back to baseline. And utilizing that reflex and having that reflex to just rest is what everybody always does, because it's just the most natural thing.
Got it. So how do we get the most out of this? You've kind of described two approaches. One, probably for someone with a little less resilience, more pathology. You're going to take it easy, but you can still get a ton of benefit even after one session, and not pushing yourself too hard. And then the other side of this is, okay, the type A personalities, the elite athletes, the people who have noticed the benefits already, they can really push themselves. So can you describe, or can you point us in the direction of where we could find protocols, maybe places to start for each of those approaches?
Well, it's interesting. We actually use the same protocol for everyone, which is interesting because the protocol uses the person's own judgment. So if you're starting with somebody who's, I'll call it health challenged, okay, you get on the system and you breathe oxygen till you feel good. Then go ahead and challenge yourself. So we coach them in some terms of challenging themselves. And then when they feel challenged, switch back to oxygen to recover. And then when you're ready, you go back. Now, that's a personal internal cycle, but it doesn't matter somebody's health challenge, because they'll just not be able to go as hard, but the cycle. And you go over to somebody that's in the type A personality, okay, or the more fit, they'll go harder longer when it's harder, and they take less time to recover. So the cycle is the same. The duration of how long they spend on oxygen versus recovery. But what's interesting is that sets up I'll call it a journey for most people. They'll start out health challenged, and a month later they'll be kicking their ass to the moon.
Great.
Because they never, they just like, they're a little stronger every day, and as they gain strength, they start to look in the mirror and see themselves as not somebody with a disease or a pathology. They'd say, well, I know there's an athlete in there somewhere. And they'll cross over that line without ever realizing it. And so LiveO2 transitions from, I'll call it a health restoration tool, to, the best workout they've ever had. And they don't even know when it happened.
That's great. So one of the things that we use in my office, and I think you recommend everyone have one, is a pulse oximeter. And that kind of feedback, so you're getting internal feedback about how you feel as you're on the bike or while you're using the device. But then also having that external feedback of saying, okay, my O2 sats are going down into the 70s or the 80s. It's probably time to switch back to positive oxygen. Or, okay, I'm back up at 98, so I'm recovered now, even though maybe it doesn't totally feel like it, but it's time to push myself and go back into the negative oxygen. Do you like using the pulse ox as a feedback mechanism?
I think more for the pulse ox, I use it as a personal progress indicator.
Oh, okay. Tell me how you use it that way.
Well, it's like, for example, how low can I push my pulse ox?
Of course.
Our present limit is 31%, believe it or not. My nephew was able to go to 31%. My children will routinely go to 41%, and they'll hit a pulse at 210 or 220. And it's like they'll use that, and basically the pulse is kind of an indication of vascular resiliency. So like in my workouts, I can tell when I'm starting to get sick or I've got some sort of bug, because my peak pulse during my workout will go down. On a good day, I'll hit 179. All right, I'm almost 60 years old. It's like, well, that's a pretty high pulse for somebody that's that old to be able to hit. So, to me, the pulse oximetry and stuff like that, I mean, I always go by how I feel on the inside and stop. Okay. But however, those numbers kind of give me feedback of what my internal resiliency is. And so I don't use them for training. I do use them for, I'll call it self-guidance, which is to say, okay, if I'm not able to get my pulse up, I need to train more, maybe train a little more frequency, extend my training, because I'm losing resilience. Or if I had some food that was bad for me, they give me some active feedback that says I might want to, cut that out of my diet. Another device I use is called an iHeart, one of these, and it basically has a pulse wave. I forget what aortic pulse wave indicator, and it basically tells the elasticity of the vascular system, and it'll give you an internal age of your vascular system. And if my internal vascular system age gets above about 42, I'm like, okay, I had something that's not good for me, to train it out and go back. So, the devices like this are sort of a, overall, how am I doing in my not getting older plan?
Got it. Yeah.
As opposed to governing the on the cycle experience.
Great. Yeah. So you are using it to get feedback, and in a little bit different way, just to say, okay, is what I've been doing healthy for me, or is there some perturbation that might be happening because compared to my baseline or compared to where I am when I'm healthiest, it's either better or worse.
Right. And that usually is an indication of things that are, I'll call it outside LiveO2, food, maybe I drank too much, or, something like that. One of the interesting things that I have learned, which is kind of a surprise, is if you take a look at the, vascular system elasticity, what the most effective thing at improving vascular elasticity is?
I'm dying to know.
2 glasses of wine.
Oh, interesting. Wasn't there that recent study that said that there was no amount of alcohol that was good for anybody? And here you are saying, no, maybe there's some improvement in your elasticity.
Well, I mean, it's measurable, and I've done it many times, but it kind of came as a surprise.
Yeah.
Because, I'll train and, so I'm always trying to manage that because, maintaining vascular health and, keeping going as long as possible is one of my goals. And anything I can do to help stay more healthy. And when I look at this, and actually measure, the data that I get within my own body is that, a glass of wine a day or two, really does. Is it not? It's pleasant, but it also, appears constructive.
That's great. So you have done some other kind of N of 1 studies. You were talking about having been to a research facility and looked at the amount of oxygen going to your brain when you did LiveO2. Can you tell us a little bit more about that experience?
Right. American College of Sports Medicine. We were at a conference in Denver, and another company was there called Artenis. All right, and they had a blood oxygen sensor that would actually shine into the brain. So it would go like 3 centimeters deep. And what was fascinating about this particular device is it would look at the blood going in, how much oxygen it had, and it would look at the blood coming out, how much oxygen it had. So you could actually do the difference, and you could measure how much oxygen the brain was actually using. So in sports terms, that's a VO2 measurement, literally, and we were able to watch it in real time. So what I did was we hooked my brain up on my right side, and we looked inside, and we looked how much oxygen my brain was using as I did the protocol. What was fascinating is that my brain oxygen use went up between 25 and 30% from the beginning of the protocol to the end of the protocol, and it was durable.
So this might be part of why you can so confidently say you'll be smarter when your feet hit the floor after using this device.
Well, that was kind of a correlation of that effect, which is we were actually we were able to correlate the before after, but we've been doing neurological panels for years, okay, and seeing that people that do this protocol will have an increase in neurological performance. I mean, there's always the subjective, which is, if you feel calm and, mentally sharp, you're relaxed. And that's pretty much the way everybody feels when they come off. Just like, yeah, I feel good.
Yeah,
like,
so that
like
kind
you.
of goes back to that parasympathetic sympathetic balance, that having done the exercise and with the LiveO2 device, that people feel generally calmer and more relaxed afterwards.
Have you had a chance to do heart rate variability studies?
Yeah.
We tend to see the HRV stabilizing with, LiveO2 there, which is also the measurement of the sympathetic parasympathetic.
Right, yeah.
Have you?
So I've usually seen them in the context of meditation or neurofeedback, but haven't used it at all in correlation with the LiveO2. So that's really fascinating. But there's some direct connection between using LiveO2 and then heart rate variability and improvements there.
Well, we were at a conference with another outfit called HeartMath, and they were coming and kind of measuring, people that did our product, and they could see a significant shift in sympathetic parasympathetic balance before and after people came in and out of our booth.
How cool, right? Because that is one of those things that we're talking about as one of these causes of disease, right? Is this stress. And whether that stress is physical or it's this parasympathetic sympathetic balance, maybe after having overworked for a long time or been injured or going through divorce, whatever the stressor is, that this device and using exercise in this way can help to balance that is really pretty profound. It gets rid of one of those causes of disease very efficiently. So where can we find out more about this? So I'm LiveO2.com, and then that protocol is at Brain. Can you remind me what the link is for that?
Yeah, if you go to LiveO2.com, you'll find that we have a menu up top called Use. And then all of our protocols are basically drop downs off that menu. But we also have LiveO2.com, Brain02, but that's a Brain02.com. We have FatigueO2.com, which are all basically hot links to our different ways of using the system. So that all, our goal there is, people start looking for oxygen, and because they've got a health objective, something's going on, they've got a need they're trying to fill, they're trying to stay young, and our commitment as a company is to create the ability for people to achieve their goals. And when we go back to where we started, which is, this whole concept of a stress injury, it's really the stress injury that undermines our health, and the fact that all of these things happen and nobody knows anything about them. Okay, and then oxygen is the antidote for stress injury, and the more you can oxygenate, the better. And basically our protocols are just ways to send more oxygen to specific tissues so we can be more healthy.
Great. And I think in some of those protocols, you recommend some supplements, things like arginine, citrulline that can open, and the beetroot that can open up and further accentuate that vasodilatory effect. So magnesium, is that another one that's in there? You have a handful of things that you recommend. Can you list them?
Yeah, well, usually some magnesium, mostly the vitamin C. There are a lot of the supplements that Manfred von Arden recommended, but we're also discovering that there are additionals. So, like, for example, we're feeling pretty strongly that the Qualia product, would be an excellent adjunct to do Brain02, because, like, for example, if we're opening up blood flow to new tissue in the brain that's been offline for a while, wouldn't it be nice to hit it with a happy
give it all those building blocks that it needs to repair.
Blocks.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, if you have one of those brownout spots that you were describing in your brain, and now all of a sudden the vascular system is open and ready to deliver nutrients, if you don't have the nutrients there to deliver, then you're only going to get half the benefit. So absolutely, I can see that. And we're using that certainly in my office. The Qualia with the LiveO2, I think, is a great partnership.
Absolutely. So, and then when you get into, trying to grow back a specific organ, if there are supplements, I mean, one of my other favorites is lipoic acid, as a detox agent, because once you activate or reactivate blood flow to an area, working to try to deliver what a cell that's been offline for a long time might need, or making it so that the liver, or once you open up blood flow, the garbage that may have collected in tissue will wash out. You might have seen this. Have you ever been training somebody? Within about 6 minutes of when they open up, you smell all this yucky stuff coming out of their breath.
Yeah, you can smell chemicals. It almost smells like if somebody were painting the room. Or I had a patient describe like smelling her mom's perfume that she hadn't been around for a decade or more, but like that smell started coming out of her breath, her skin. So yeah, without a doubt, you're opening up detox pathways. And you guys have a detox protocol as well, right? That includes the sauna?
So if we talk about the little brownout areas, what happens is the vascular system chokes off and blood stops rolling through there or flowing through there. When that happens, anything that gets trapped in that area basically stays there because the flow that would normally carry it out is blocked. Okay, so when people go on LiveO2, we're talking about, well, how come we smell this weird stuff coming out of the breath? Well, what happens is when we break through, we reestablish the flow, and all of the garbage that's collected in that browned out tissue washes into the bloodstream. So as the heart pumps, stuff that garbage in the bloodstream will go back, circle through the lungs, and if they're volatiles or things that want to go into a gaseous form, when that blood flows through the lungs, it'll go into the air in the lungs and you'll blow it out. So when you're working with somebody and you smell them, blowing off DEET, mosquito repellent, or paint, or perfume, what you're seeing is that, wow, whatever tissue that stuff was in had been locked offline or choked off or browned out since whenever it was when that material got trapped in there.
Right, since they were exposed, probably.
Well, just like in the example, you're talking about the person's like, wow, that's my mom's perfume. She's been dead for 15 years. Well, the tissue that opened up to release that had been browned out for 15 years.
Wow. Imagine the potential, right? Because where was that? What if that was in the kidneys or the liver, some vital organ? I guess it probably adipose tissue as well. But if somebody's trying to lose weight, then wow, fantastic. We're really opening up all of these organs or potential places where it could be stored and getting that all that potential, right? Like all of these cells have jobs to do. And if they're browned out, they're not doing them.
Well, okay, so if you go into those little brownouts, so, this odor phenomenon is really kind of it's a door to a really deep well in physiology. So if you imagine a region of cells that's browned out that, blood can't get to, well, there's 3 or 4 problems with that. The first is they're not going to be able to do their job. The second is gunk or toxins are going to accumulate there. The third is these cells are going to be isolated from the immune system because blood can't get close. The fourth is because they're living in an anaerobic environment, they're going to be acidic. Okay, so they're going to age fast. If you're going to get a disease, you're going to degenerate here. All right, and if you're going to get, I'll call it cell reproduction defects that eventually result in diseases like cancer, guess where it's going to happen?
Yeah, right in that spot. There's so much potential benefit here. It's just incredible. And it almost seems too simple, right? Because all we're doing is using these physiological parts of the body that already exist. We're just enhancing them.
That's it. And that's the beauty and elegance of it. Our bodies already know how to do all this stuff. All we need to do is nudge. A little bit of exercise, open things up, and that's why we see these amazing stories about, wow, I had a lady here 3 weeks ago, and she had I'll call it a long history of fatigue related syndromes, and I got her on camera saying, wow, I haven't felt this good in 38 years.
That's incredible. Wow, what a gift. What a gift that you are offering. I have one thing that's coming up for me. Oxygen therapy. When I spent some time scuba diving in my early 20s, and if you are on oxygen all the time, or pure oxygen, it can be very detrimental. So too much oxygen can be a problem. Have you guys ever seen any issues with too much oxygen burning the lungs or increasing some sort of risk in another direction? Can we overdo it in a way that could be harmful?
Not that we've seen. So I think there's probably three different answers there. Okay, you get into oxygen, all right, or oxygen toxicity, which happens at about 4 atmospheres at 12 hours of pure oxygen. So that's a long time under a lot of pressure. So that's one thing that can happen. It's been documented. But, in our systems, like in my typical workout, I'll go 45 minutes and maybe 3 minutes of oxygen. So it's such a small amount. But even a regular workout at 15 minutes, there's not enough oxygen or oxygen present for a long enough time to get anywhere near those known harmful thresholds.
Okay.
Another one is, like, for example, in the Air Force, I was reading the congressional testimony about the Raptor, the F-24, and the pilots in there were having respiratory problems.
This is a plane. I don't know what this is.
Oh, this is the new super fighter. Okay, and so there was a big congressional deal about that. And what was happening is that the pilots, they give them pure oxygen. Well, first point would be LiveO2 does not use pure oxygen for a very good reason, because if you take pure oxygen and you put it in the alveoli, and the oxygen's completely absorbed by the alveoli, you'll actually collapse the alveoli.
So this is in the lung. So the alveoli are the functional units of the lung, where the oxygen transfer is happening. It's going from the lungs into the circulation, into the blood.
Correct. The alveoli are the little sacs in the lungs where the air goes inside, and then they have capillaries surrounding them, so the gases will transfer through the alveolar membrane. Okay, so when people talk about pure oxygen is never a good idea, because you need some nitrogen inside there to prevent the alveoli from fully collapsing.
I see. So, okay, I'm with you.
So, and then another thing that's relatively important is pressure swings. So people get confused about, how should I breathe, through my nose or my mouth? It turns out that we prefer to breathe through our nose because the extra force that it takes to draw air through our nostrils increases the vacuum inside the alveoli and the lungs, which creates a bigger pressure gradient, which helps pull the carbon dioxide out of our blood. You'll also notice that when you go out and run, if you're feeling oxygen, what you'll do is you'll exhale by blowing out your lips. You're increasing the back pressure, like on the exhale, that pushes the oxygen across the alveoli into the blood. So we have all of these built-in reflexes that help us maximize that transfer. So, the point there is, too much oxygen. What happens is that our bodies naturally adapt, and we have these reflexes that naturally kick in when we need to regulate more or less oxygen. So, our normal reflex to absorb less oxygen is, guess what? We don't breathe as much.
Oh, okay. Yeah, of course. That makes perfect sense.
And our normal reflex for keeping or retaining carbon dioxide is what?
To breathe less. To breathe out less, yeah.
Actually, it's to breathe in less.
Oh.
Okay, so you notice when you're sitting there, if you're resting, and if your body's trying to retain carbon dioxide, you'll sit with your lungs empty. All right, when you need to dump carbon dioxide, your reflex is inhale. Okay, because that vacuum pulls the carbon dioxide out of the blood and swings the blood alkali. It reduces the carbonic acid.
Interesting. Okay, and I think of getting rid of carbon dioxide as exhaling, but you're saying when that's happening in the lungs, at that physiological part of the lung, that functional unit, that's actually happening when you inhale. Interesting.
Right.
Okay.
And so when you're pushing air out of the lungs, you inhale to remove carbon dioxide from the blood. You exhale, potentially creating back pressure when your body wants to push the oxygen into your blood. So you can look at your own breathing pattern and figure out which part of the cycle your body's actually emphasizing.
Interesting. Okay, that was a good physiology lesson. I needed a little refresher in how all of this was working. But it sounds like all in all, using the LiveO2 system is going to be safe. You're not going to get into any danger zone by breathing this oxygen. And you said it's 80 to 85% concentrated oxygen, right? So we never get up to 100.
Right. Well, people get, enamored with the concept of pure oxygen, but the reality is, what really matters, and this was a bit of a surprise to us, it's, oxygen is important, but it's nowhere near as important as the symphony of activities that go on in the body to move the oxygen from the lungs to the tissues. And that's where the hypoxia, getting the heart rate up, activating all of the carrier transport processes, with, getting the blood to move through the lungs with as much force as possible, getting the blood to move through the vascular system with as much vigor as possible, getting the blood to hit the end of the capillaries with as much force as possible with as much oxygen. It's all of these other things that make breathing work. Okay, so like in LiveO2, our goal is the creation of a perfect storm. So when we're talking about the brain, we call it magic moment. When you get your brain going and that oxygen hits your brain because you got all of the things working right at the same time, you're like, whoa, what was that? And your brain is like not quite locked onto it. But what happens is like, oh, I want some more of that. You don't know what it is. You can't put it into words, but your body just knows it was good. And so when you start to talk about the other side, our bodies learn quickly. Like, we talk about our mutual patient or, your patient that I'm supporting. Mm-hmm. He knows what feels good. And when he finds that, it's our reflex to go do more of it.
Right. Yeah. And so he's addicted. He jokes that this is like his mistress, his girlfriend, that he needs to see it every day. He needs to use the LiveO2 machine because it makes him feel so much better. So yes, right. I have definitely seen that. We don't think that the relationship is pathological yet.
Well, to go back to your question about safety, like for example, our bodies know what's good for us and not. And because we have complete control over actions when we're exercising, those actions kind of guide us into safe behavior.
Yeah, okay, I love that you're listening to that feedback from your own body and you're pushing yourself as much as you want to, but you can always flip the switch. You can always slow down. You can look at the pulse ox. You can look at the heart rate. There's a lot of ways to get feedback to keep yourself in a comfortable space, but also getting the benefit.
I'll give you another example. I was talking about, a friend that came over last week. I mean, she's in horrible shape. But what was interesting was, she, even though she was so miserable, she couldn't walk or anything like that, was she went in the sauna and she started. And what was interesting is she just went, and even though the only thing she could really do was breathe, you could see her bloom and blossom because she could feel it was good for her. And then the other thing was she got this like, okay, I've got some power over my own health. And when they take that power, almost no matter how weak they are, they feel the strength and like, I'm going to use this strength. And it's their instinct that drives them. And so as soon as you reach the point where that instinct kicks in, where they've got the power to be and do and take control of their life, it's just magical to watch how the energy comes over them. And so the whole notion that my life is doomed to misery, as soon as they see the light at the end of the tunnel, that there's something that they can do where they get that power back, they just go for it. And it doesn't matter if they're a 90-year-old with COPD. The fact that they've got some authority and ability to reclaim their health, it just gives them power, and they charge.
Okay, so if somebody, after listening to us and our enthusiasm about this, is ready to go for it, what are their options? Do you guys have more than one type of device? Can more than one person use this, or is it just for one person at a time? Like, how does it all work, and what are your options? Can you break it down for us?
We've got 3 different configurations. We have a standard oxygen-only device, which we call LiveO2 Standard, which is very reasonably priced. And that's really kind of designed for people that are in, I'll call it a financial challenge and the least expensive system. Then we have our LiveO2 with adaptive contrast, which is the regular system. We try to steer everyone to that one because it does the oxygenation, but it does it so well that people can transition with a health restoration objective into, I'll call it an anti-aging, full-blown training device. So we have, our users there are people that are paralyzed all the way to, high-end Olympic athletes. So that's kind of the at-home, what we recommend. And then we have institutional configurations, which are multi-user. Earlier this year, we released a 2-user system, which will basically let 2 people train simultaneously on the same platform, all day long.
Great.
So there's 3 different levels.
And so it takes a little bit of time. I know at my office, we've got to turn it on about an hour before someone is planning to use it. So the reservoir of concentrated oxygen is what it is. It takes about an hour to fill. Is that the same for all of the systems? Or if somebody's in a rush, can they get one that fills faster, I think? Is that available?
No. We have, you can stack the air separation. So you've got our basic system, which is a single air separator, and it takes about 45 minutes for the system to charge fully. So that's, we call that like a 1 user per hour system. Okay, then, so if you doubled the air separator, you could run probably 2 users per hour on that system. Okay, then with our other systems, like multiple users, you can run 3, 4, 5 people an hour, depending.
Got it. Okay. So depending on what your needs are or how quickly you need to turn it over, then you guys have some options. Where can our listeners find it?
LiveO2.com.
Great. And Annette and everybody there has been so helpful, so responsive, so easy to work with. We just feel very fortunate to have this device in my office, and our patients love it. So thank you for making it available, Mark. Anything else you want to add? Tell our listeners before we say goodbye?
Of course. One of the things I'd like to do is, say how wonderful it is to work with the people I get to work with. Annette, Rob, Tom. We're an employee-owned company. And, just to have the privilege of spending my working days, working with these people is just, it's awesome. And so I take a lot of pride in the quality of the people that I have the privilege of working with.
Yeah, I have to echo that. They do such a great job. So thank you, Mark, so much for taking the time today to chat with us and to expand my lung physiology again, give me that refresher. And also, I just learned so much from you every time we get on the phone. So thank you again for being here and enlightening me about the wonders of oxygen and this therapy.
Thank you, Heather.
Want to learn a better strategy for mental well-being? We designed a beautifully illustrated 32-page guide integrating care for your mind, brain, body, and environment into a balanced approach for a better life. Download the foundational guide to neurohacking at neurohacker.com/guide.